And that is the way people treat God. You know, it's all right, Lord, out of my superabundance, look how you blessed me. Oh, I'd love to give you a gift, Lord. You know, your work, hope it prosper. But they never give to the point of need. Providing they can give out of superabundance, fine. That's the natural man. He's a bit subtle. Spiritual man, well, he makes sacrifices. When you read Whitfield's book, if some of you have taken the trouble to read it, I mean, that man gave and gave and gave. Some people won't give unless they've got a superabundance. Lord, if you bless me and prosper me, then I'll give. So God prospers them and blesses them, so they give. But they'll only give the portion they can really afford. As long as it doesn't really hurt me, Lord, I really feel I should give. But when you have to give out and it costs you, then it's a bit of a different game, isn't it? Difference between the natural and the spiritual. See, we're to deny ourselves. But denial of self is not always easy, is it? But it's a nice feeling when you give out of your superabundance. It's nice to give, isn't it? Nice to give to God, isn't it? Well, isn't it? Makes you feel nice inside, doesn't it? Or doesn't it? Or doesn't it? But how many give out of the superabundance? I mean, Lord, open hand. Well, I mean, I can afford to give you this. Feel good inside about it, Lord, but spiritual man goes beyond that. There's nothing in you that's righteous if you haven't got there, Love of money is the root of all evil. Hardest thing to get out of a person is that root. Isn't it? Somehow it goes deep. Now the natural man gets hooked up, deceives his own heart. Spiritual man's of a different caliber. Unless you give till it costs, you haven't given. Oh, you have in a natural sense, not in the spiritual. And it's one of the lessons we all need to learn. Christian lives, and living is loving. Because he loves his Lord, he makes sacrifices. And then H, the natural man, when he reacts to trials and tribulations, reacts with bitterness. Found in your heart, something happens and it makes you angry. Why'd God let this happen? I've heard people say it. I thought God loved me. If God really cared, and so on and so on. Now what they're saying is they're just living in a natural plane, no spirituality in their lives at all. When a man or a woman questions like that, there's something awfully wrong with their inward nature. You see, tribulation and the way we react to it and trials tells us a lot about our spirit. The Christian, he has a knowledge that all things work together for good to them that love God, to those who are the called according to his purposes. And somehow he knows, even though it seems so contrary, he knows God is working out a great weight of glory and he's going to bless him out of it. He's dealing with things in his life. He's doing things. And his reaction is a total trust in God. Lord, I don't see the way it'll turn out, but I know you're faithful and I know you'll deal. And you're dealing with my heart and life, and I'm trusting in that. I know it seems impossible, but good will come out of it. That's the spiritual man's attitude. Natural man's is to grouse and grumble and accuse God and accuse the brethren and accuse anyone. Spiritual man said, well, God's faithful. When trial and tribulation come, which way do you go? In your prayer life, what's happening, Lord? Or Job's attitude, though he slay me, yet will I love him. When sickness comes, are you asking God what's gone wrong? Or are you saying, well, all things work together for good to those that love God? How ticks it in you? Natural man or spiritual? And then we go on to I. Now the natural man, when injustice is done to him, and he feels someone's done an injustice to him, does he react? Boy, he knows his rights to a T, and he'll demand them. Whereas the spiritual man looks at the things and he says, well, God's will be done, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. And he doesn't have a resignation, he has a positive attitude to it, knowing that it's in God's purpose, it's God's sovereign. Great difference between the natural and the spiritual. And then J, the natural man, the best natural man, can be passive towards his enemies. He won't exactly hate them. You know, he won't get bitter about them. There's a passivity with the best you can do in natural man. But the spiritual man will love his enemies. He will sympathize with them, he'll care for them, and he'll seek to win them. Might seek to win them by speaking the truth and standing up. But he's not got any animosity. He sees that they oppose themselves. They don't oppose you, really. They don't oppose God. They're opposing themselves and their hope of salvation. And then K, the natural man, dies with dignity. There's a lot of men who've died with dignity. When death comes, there's a lot of people who put on a brave face and a stiff upper lip, and then they've gone stiff all over. But there's a lot of people who die with kind of a brave face and courage. In fact, as they pass from this life, they seem to have confidence. And yet the Christian sees departing from this life, he's going to a better kingdom. Somehow he sees this life as but a transitional period till he goes into glory to ever be with his Lord, and he looks forward to separating from the body and going to being present with God. Christian dies not passively or negatively with a kind of dignity. He dies with a joy that he's going to meet his Maker and be with him forever. What a difference between the natural and the spiritual. When you're there, when a natural man dies, somehow it's almost as though the devil's come to get his own. I've seen that. But with a spiritual man, he just rejoices that God's going to let him escape from this body and this old flesh and go to glory. What a wonderful thing. Now, looking at all those natural and spiritual, where do you fit? Which side are you on? Now, it's no good being spiritual for 3, natural for 12. Or natural for 11 and spiritual for 1 and think you'll be all right because you can die rejoicing. That's no good. What you've got to do, you've got to say, just a minute. Let me examine myself, whether I'm really in the faith. Am I walking in the Spirit or am I walking in the flesh? How do I react? What's going on in me? See, all these things are to do with being perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Having that spirit and nature. The nature of the Lamb. Now, here we have no continuing city. You remember it says in Hebrews 11, there's no continuing city. We don't look for this life as our end. We're looking for the next life. This life is only a transitional thing. It's preparing us for glory and for heaven. We're not actually building anything here, except the white hut. But that's not going to last. That's going to burn. That's why it's wooden. It'll go quicker. We're not going to keep it. The black hut will go as quick too. We're not going to keep it. It'll all go. What we have to understand is what God's purposes are. Do understand that. God's intention. And we should be living saying, Lord, we know this isn't our dwelling place for all eternity. We're just living here now, but we know that it's glory we're looking towards. We're living for the future, not living for the present. The difference between the natural and the spiritual man, the natural man will say something like, I'm going to set my will and live to this standard. The spiritual man will take one look at the standard and say, oh, Lord, there's one thing I cannot do, and that's live like that. Unless you come and unless you change my nature and you impart your life into me, there is no way I can live like that. Unless you come and you do a work within by divine grace, you can forget it. I cannot be perfect like my Father is in heaven. There's no way. Now I want you to notice something. Jesus didn't say be perfect like God. He said be perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect. And there's one thing about it. The only people that can live like that are people who are born of God. By your natural birth, you'll never make it. But when God's your Father in heaven, and when you come to realize and have the cry of the Spirit which cries, Abba, Father, and you realize that God's your Father, then, quite honestly, and not to put it irreverently, but to put it in a term, you can become like a chip off the old block, so to speak. In other words, my son, whatever else he might do, he has some of my traits. There's something about him that identifies him as being my son, besides the size of his head and his handsome features. There's something about him that identifies him with me. His willingness to win. There's certain aspects of the nature inside. Now, when God's your Father, you have those aspects. When God is your Father, there's something about you. Now, you might not yet be perfect in the sense of fullness of perfection, but there is within you a hungering and thirsting after righteousness, a recognition of poorness of spirit, a mourning over your state. There are all the things that Christ listed. And then there are signs of the fruit of the Spirit in your life, a total change. You live totally outside the realm of the natural. You're in the spiritual realm. If so be, God's met you. Now, you're going down. There'll be a day when you'll step into glory, having put off this body. But until then, you'll get a lower and lower and worse estimation of yourself. If you think you've gone anywhere spiritually, it shows you've gone nowhere. When you know you've gone nowhere, you're actually getting somewhere. You're getting to the point of realizing you're nowhere. And when you realize you are nowhere, then you really have got somewhere. And you begin to realize that Christ has got to be all in your life. And if he doesn't live the life through you, that's the end. You can't do it.